Hi everyone and welcome to Shaluso, and I'd like to give a big thank you to RX8 Golden Shield for providing the watch we're going to be looking at today, and that is the Omega Speedmaster Moonwatch Professional Sapphire Sandwich.
In the 1960s, a Cold War raged in Switzerland as much as it did in Moscow and Washington. Omega and Rolex had been competing to make the best professional watches. Rolex had a few early victories in the mountains and under the sea, but Omega took a cue from the world's superpowers and looked to the skies. The Speedmaster had already been to space unofficially with Wally Schirra's CK-2998 in 1962, but the true victory came in 1969 when it beat out Breitling, Hamilton, Longines, and Rolex to earn a NASA approval to accompany Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin to the surface of the moon. This gave the Speedmaster its Moonwatch nickname, and ironically banished the Rolex Cosmograph name to the Daytona Speedway. Its rugged construction, high contrast dial, and protected pusher area that made it an ideal companion in space formed the iconic look that the Moonwatch has sported since the 1960s. And since then it still joins astronauts in space, making it a true Speedmaster Professional, as well as being one of the few Omegas to feature a consistent, almost unchanged design language for over half a century. The 42mm diameter would have seemed huge in the 60s, but it fits in nicely with today's style, and with its sculpted lines and relatively thin 13.9mm profile, it has a streamlined presence on the wrist. The twin trigger clasp is shorter than its brethren on the 300M and Playa Oceans. This is due to the lack of a dive extension, but it still has two micro adjustment points and a solid construction that makes for one of the few clues that this is a modern Speedmaster and not one straight out of the 60s. This continues onto the bracelet, where it's sized with screws along its polished sides, with the top of the links being satin with polished inserts in between, similar to the Seamaster 300M bracelet. This reveals one of the key strengths of the Moonwatch. Its charming look, discreetly polished bracelet, and wrist-friendly proportions allow it to get away with being an alternative to a dress watch, while still being perfectly at home as a sports watch, though ideally one far away from water as it only has 50 meters of water resistance. On the inside is the Omega Calibre 1863, mechanically identical to the 1861 but with better decoration, visible through the display case back and even more so thanks to being hand wound so there's no rotor to obscure the movement. The 1861 and 63 trace their lineage back to the Lamagna 1873 that walked on the moon, and was first introduced in 1968 as a replacement for the Omega 321. The movement wasn't picked for being the most sophisticated or technologically advanced. Instead, it was chosen for its reliability, something Omega still attests to today with a 5-year warranty offered on new Speedmasters. It's manually wound and with a 48-hour power reserve. Manual wind being a preference as the lack of gravity in space would render an automatic rotor useless. Its big balance wheel beats at 21,600 VPH and features a cam-operated lateral clutch chronograph displaying seconds, minutes, and hours. This function was key during the Apollo 13 mission where they had to time a 14-second fuel burn to get them back on course to Earth. Yet another example of the Speedmaster's many accomplishments in space. On the face of it, the Speedmaster Professional is pretty straightforward. A purposeful watch with high contrast, mostly satin finish, no big technological or ergonomic advancement, and the only real decoration going into the movement because this particular model has a display case back. But the Moonwatch is about the whole experience, knowing you have a part of history on your wrist, and to appreciate that you need to take a step back and look at the bigger picture of what owning this watch includes. The Omega branded loop featuring a tachymeter to match the bezel of the watch not only lets you admire the decoration of the 1863, but also little details like the grainy texture on the dial, or on the Hesalite version you can see the little Omega logo embossed on the crystal. The Speedmaster paperweight features the hippocampus, a symbol of the Seamaster. But this is a reminder that the Speedmaster originally was part of that collection before it earned its own one. But the Moonwatch still pays homage to that history. Then there's the NASA Velcro strap, the same as the ones used in space and still bearing a genuine NASA part number to remind you this watch is still being used by NASA today. But you also get an Omega NATO strap, simple and all black like the NASA one, but a bit more user-friendly in the Earth's atmosphere. And of course they provide a springboard tool to assist you in these changes, so you know Omega intends you to actually use all of these things. And that brings us back to the Moonwatch itself. This is a watch intended in its entirety to be used, whether by NASA, by collectors. Its usability has transcended a planet and its moon, and Omega has put in over 50 years of effort to keep it that way, improving only the most necessary parts, but staying true to being the ultimate professional watch.
So that's my thoughts on the Speedmaster Professional Moonwatch. And last review I did, I talked about how the Rolex Submariner 16610 was a great example of modern vintage. It was something that was made relatively recent, but still very much a watch from the 80s. This watch, I feel, takes that to another level. And that brings us straight into the positives and negatives for it. And the first positive is that modern vintage element. Whereas that Rolex was literally a product of another time, they discontinued it in 2010, it just lasted a while. The Moonwatch is pretty much, barring a few details, a clone of the watch that was made in the 60s. The main things that they've changed is, of course, in the case of this one, they have the Sapphire sandwich instead of the Hesselite, but you can still get it with Hesselite and with a solid case back. And then the other major change is just the quality of the bracelet. Obviously, this is a much better bracelet, but for all intents and purposes, this is still an original Moonwatch. It still uses the same based caliber. It's still a manual wind. It still looks the same. And it even comes with a NASA accessory strap that features the genuine part number for that strap that NASA astronauts use. But it still has a 5-year warranty. You can still go into an AD and buy it today. You can still buy a 2019 watch from 1969. And that, I think, is a great way for people to really experience the history of watches. The fact that you can get something like that, it's not something you can do in any other industry. In cars, for example, you can't make a Mustang that's spec for spec the same as the one from the 60s. Because you have emissions regulations, you have crash regulations, bumpers need to be in certain places, lights need to be in certain places. You can at best make an homage to it. But this is essentially the same watch, just with the vintage element of having a rickety bracelet improved. But the rest is pretty much all the same. Even the bezel is still aluminum instead of ceramic. So that's definitely a big advantage for this watch, and something that I really like about it. The second advantage is that because it has that vintage feel, it's come to a point where it's sort of acceptable to wear it in formal occasions. If you look at how this watch looks on the leather strap that Omega can sell it to you with, it could easily pass for a formal watch. And since it isn't too tall, it also means it'll still slip under your cuff. So it really adds a lot of versatility in terms of being able to wear this as a sports watch as well as a more formal watch. And considering that it comes with a NATO as well, you can even dress it all the way down to that. And that brings us to the third positive, which is the box and accessories. So the box itself is enormous. And then on the inside, you have this nylon or ballistic nylon suitcase that opens up, and there you see in all its glory the Speedmaster looking right back at you. But then you have all these little compartments. You get a loop so you can really admire it, and on the Sapphire sandwich, that's great because you can really take a close look at the movement. You then have not one, but 2 Omega NATO straps. The first one being a regular one in black with stainless steel hardware, and then the other one is the NASA one, which has the genuine part number and specification of the same straps that NASA astronauts use. And you also have this nice big paperweight with the Seamaster hippocampus, because the Speedmaster was originally part of the Seamaster line. It's a little bit confusing, but Omega, clearly since the 60s, has been a bit confusing with their model lines. Even today, you have about 7 or 8 different ranges of Seamaster, and then you have a ton of different Speedmasters and DeVilles, etc. So clearly Omega is staying true to how it is, but the important thing is that they've given you all of these accessories so that it can be special the moment you open it. A lot of people will say that it's gimmicky, but I think a lot of the value is in the specialness of this watch. And Omega has gone to great lengths to really make this watch seem special. For a lot of people, this will be their first luxury watch or maybe their first luxury chronograph. And you can tell that Omega knows that and wanted to make it special. That being said though, not every watch is perfect. And this is still a watch that's based in 1969. So the first disadvantage to this watch has to be the 50-meter water resistance. Now, I'm not saying that this is a watch that should be able to go scuba diving, but 50 meters is very low. To put it in perspective, one of its biggest competitors, the Rolex Daytona, that has 100 meters of water resistance. So does the Tag Heuer Altavia. So does the Tudor Black Bay Chrono, which has 200 meters of water resistance. Even other Omega Speedmasters with the same case have higher water resistance. The Broad Arrow was 100 meters water resistance. The 57 is 100 meters water resistance. Even the coaxial Professional Moonwatch is 100 meters. So definitely this is an area where I feel Omega could have improved without compromising the integrity of this concept, which is a watch that is authentic to the original Moonwatch. The second disadvantage is the lack of date. Now, some people might say, oh, you know, it doesn't really matter who really checks the date. But the fact of the matter is that when you get a no-date watch, that's when you realize that it's a problem. I know this firsthand from when I experienced and borrowed the Daytona, that not having that date really makes a difference if you're used to it. If this is your first watch, then maybe it won't make the biggest impact. But a date complication is so incredibly convenient. It's just that little bit more useful, and for something that you do want to look at as much as possible, not having a date window means one less reason to look at your watch. And with a watch this good looking, you definitely want to find every excuse to look at it. And then the last disadvantage is the fact that it is a lateral clutch cam system setup. Now, this is very true to the original, but from a practical standpoint, it means that you run the risk of damaging the movement if you run the chronograph for too long. These days, lots of different chronographs are now running a column wheel vertical clutch setup, and one of the key advantages of that is that you can run the chronograph without wearing down the movement. So with this, I feel like, again, it's another area where maybe you won't be able to enjoy it to its fullest, whereas if it had a vertical clutch and column wheel, that would have been a little bit better in terms of being able to always have it running, really admire it in motion, as opposed to using just the small seconds. But all in all, this is still an amazing watch, and what I really love about it is how true it is to the concept. From everything from the box, to the styling, to the manual wind, it feels like a watch from the 60s and 70s in every possible good way, without the drawback of having a rickety bracelet. And you even have a display case back so you can admire that beautifully finished movement, which is slightly different from the 1861. The 1863, they finish it to a higher standard, so you are getting that extra value in it. Now, speaking of value, the Sapphire Sandwich Moonwatch comes in at $6,350 US. So it's by no means cheap. And on the pre-owned market, you can buy it anywhere from about $3,900 up to about $6,000 US. So that presents an interesting conundrum because it's not too much depreciation when you're looking at pre-owned. And if you consider that Omega does tend to discount its watches at its ADs, you can probably pick one up for roughly that pre-owned price, but still buy it new. Or if you do pick it up pre-owned, if it's a recent model, you can still get it with that 5-year warranty or with most of that warranty back. So as a value proposition, really, if you compare it to the only other watch that really is this true to its original design, the Breitling Navitimer, the cheapest Navitimer that you can get on a bracelet is $6,800 US. But it doesn't really come with the same history, it doesn't come with the same accessories, it doesn't even come with an in-house movement, so you make a lot of compromises for spending a bit more money. Whereas the Moonwatch is completely true to its concept, it's barely changed in the last 50 years, and it does have that cachet of being the watch that astronauts still use today. It's something extremely special and such a complete package, especially when you include the box and accessories. It's an amazing watch to have as your first luxury watch, or even just adding it to a collection because it's a classic and for good reason. But in any case, let me know in the comments below, what do you think of the Speedmaster? I think that it's an amazing watch, and I definitely will include a Speedmaster of some kind in my collection in the future. But I'd love to know what you think of it. And if you like this video, please do like it and share it. And if you want to see all the pictures and graphics featured in this video, make sure you follow me on Instagram at Shaluso. And if you want to keep seeing new watch content, make sure you subscribe to the channel as well. In any case, thanks for watching this video, and we'll catch you on the next one.